one of the very first public-private partnerships between a private organization, an ENGO, and the state of Colorado. And what happened through that is we ended up losing 80% of our operation through a land grab. 2015, we had a black swan event that we lost most of our equity. 2019, a fire in a beef processing plant in Kansas. We lost another 40% of our equity. And then, of course, COVID came along and everything came to a halt.
Shad Sullivan is an American cattle rancher and the RCAF USA Private Property Rights Committee Chair. A fifth-generation native of southeast Colorado, Sullivan learned the ropes of the cowboy lifestyle early on. Shad firmly believes beef and liberty, where there is beef, there is freedom. His research and years of first-hand experience clearly make this correlation in his article in Tri-State Livestock News. Why is there a war on beef? A new order would require global elites to control the means of production through collectivism. Thus, individual liberty must be sacrificed to fascist control of production and natural resources. Create a crisis, i.e. climate change, and create the solution, i.e. sustainable development, and fascism thrives.
Joining us now, cattle rancher and RCAF USA Private Property Rights Committee Chair, Shad Sullivan. What is the gravest threat that they're trying to lay on the American people and you?
Well, I think the gravest threat is the attack on private property. We know that this global agenda is happening all over the European Union right now, and we know it starts with the global elite.
Sullivan's family had a stalker operation on Antelope Mesa in Crowley County, Colorado. There, he learned the importance of hard work, dedication, loyalty, and integrity. He said his greatest love is watching his cattle grow, which has become a passion for protecting his property rights. After falling victim to and witnessing the tragic loss of family farms and ranches through bureaucratic, market, and industry corruption, he realized that liberty and production is at stake, and it all starts with private property rights. Notably, he has been an outspoken advocate for American ranchers on numerous news programs, podcasts, and radio shows. We applaud Shad for his dedication to America's constitutional property rights and for working to keep our country free and fed. Also, congratulations to Shad for being awarded Protect the Harvest, Friend of the Land Award for February 2024.
You know what California just did and why it affects all of us?
Well, with the passage of Prop 12, that would inhibit importers into California. That would regulate the people who sell into California under the same rules, which would eliminate, a lot of transactions that they need.
Right.
This is Mary Starr. Welcome to Awake to Truth podcast. Shad, it is such a pleasure to have you with us today. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to come on Awake to Truth. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Mary.
It is, it's going to be a great day. So I want to just go ahead and hit the ground rolling. Let's start with, tell us about the article you wrote in Tri-State News, because that was such a well-written, all-encompassing article explaining so many things in very simple terms that everyone can appreciate and understand. So if you could just please start with that story, that would be great.
Well, we have to go back further than that, Mary, and start with why I'm here and not here on your podcast, but just here as an advocate and an activist. And so back in 1999, when my family experienced a very hard experience of land taking through one of the very first public-private partnerships between a private organization, an ENGO, and the state of Colorado. And what happened through that is we ended up losing 80% of our operation through a land grab. And so that kind of put me on the road to paying attention to what's going on in our country, and constitutional rules, and all of that. And so we move forward about 10 years, and I'm starting to see these illegal moves by the federal government, illegal moves by ENGOs and NGOs, and they came up with a movement called the Global Roundtable for Sustainable Beef. And it really started bothering me what the word sustainability meant, what sustainable development was. And so I just did a deep dive into that. And that was about 2010. And so ever since then, I've been studying what sustainable development was. And the Lord has put great people in my path to help me understand that. And so fast forward to, say, 2024. Well, let's go back to 2020 when COVID hit. And there was always a black swan. My business is the cattle business. And 2015, we had a black swan event that we lost most of our equity. 2019, a fire in a beef processing plant in Kansas. We lost another 40% of our equity. And then, of course, COVID came along and everything came to a halt. And so as that was happening, I realized things were not quite right. And the reason is the very first time the federal government come out and said, do not gather with your friends and family. And I immediately put my ears up, and the hair on the back of my neck stood up and said, this has nothing to do with a disease. Because that is one of our great privileges under the Constitution of the United States, is to gather together with our family and friends. And then immediately they said, oh, put your mask on, don't talk, don't go to church, don't do anything. You have to wear your mask. That was not to protect us from the disease. That was to say, hey, we're going to shut you up because you don't have a right in this country to speak against the federal government. So these things all in tandem and together perked my ears up. And so during that COVID time, all processing, we saw our processing facilities shut down. They euthanized millions of fowl, millions of hogs. They plowed under our fruit and vegetable crops. We shut down our transportation system. We shut down the supply chains, and everybody went to the grocery store and nobody could buy beef, right? That's my business. So that's the perspective I come from, is the beef business. One day when we were out in the pasture and we were baling hay, we all got, and I say all citizens got an email from the United States Department of Agriculture. And that email said, we are going to send teams out to help in the alternative marketing or disposal and destruction of your cattle herds. Now, they didn't exactly come out and say, we're going to kill them, euthanize them. But I knew what that had meant because my dad had told me about coming out of the Depression in the 30s and 50s due to drought and disease. They euthanized millions of cattle in the United States because there was no market for them. Well, because so many people in these processing plants were ill, we could not get the cattle harvested. After I read that email, I was furious. And I said, I just got on and did a video off the cuff. And I said, this is crazy. We have to get money rolling through this country. We have to get people back to work. We have to get these cattle euthanized. And that video, because it was about compliance and control, that video struck a chord with the American people, and it went viral. And I'm talking, when I say viral, 60 million views. Sustainable development is all about production and consumption control. It's communism. That's what this is. Mm-hmm. And it's been, it has come to us through incremental infiltration into our local, state, and national governments, into our organizations, our trade organizations, not just in agriculture, but in every other genre as well. But agriculture, especially, because what do? We control the land in agriculture. And so that has worked into a lot of great relationships, into property rights. I've always been a property rights advocate. And so when and I will say that probably elevated me to a different level, in society, maybe on some people's terms as a conspiracy theorist, and on some people's terms of, hey, this does make sense. Something is happening here. And so, through all of that and the new relationships I'd formed, it steamrolled into more speaking and more speaking. And then all of a sudden in 2023, the natural asset issue came out. And I wrote an article on the natural asset issue, and that was picked up by Glenn Beck, and I did his show. And in his show, I wanted to make sure people understood where this sustainable development was coming from. And in order to do that, we must start at the very top. So where does it originate from? Because we know as an American civilization, our government is built from the bottom up. The people have the power in our government. That's the way it's supposed to be. But as this was coming into fruition, into the beef industry, into all of these industries, we see that the rules were coming from the top down. And that was a problem. So I said to myself, we've got to figure out where this is coming from. Well, through these relationships, I already knew that it started at the global, at the very top of the global level. The global cabal or the global elite, those very few families that control everything and all money on the earth. Those are the people who want total control. And in order to do that, they must have foot soldiers. And so you go from the global cabal down to their foot soldiers, which right now, number 2 in line is the World Economic Forum. Well, it's actually the United Nations, and then the non-governmental entity of the World Economic Forum working side by side. And then they each have their foot soldiers to implement sustainable development regionally and nationally across the world, so they can control all production and consumption. And so I wrote an article basically summating all of that. And that article hit the Tri-State News and many others as well. And so my goal with that article is to help people understand, because it's so complex, I want them to be able to understand on a very personal level easily how it is. So I just wanted to do it in stages: global cabal to the UN World Economic Forum, down to governmental entities like the European Union, the African Union, and then into how it infiltrates into your everyday life through trade organizations, colleges and universities, local state governments, your churches. We're seeing it everywhere. But that's what incremental infiltration does. And all of a sudden, at one point, it's a conspiracy, and then all of a sudden, no, it's here. It's real, because they have already infiltrated your organizations. And so I wrote that article, and that's how we got here.
Well, I want to first of all say thank you for doing a deep dive into such a complex and difficult to articulate subject. It's not just one level. As you've said, there are many layers, and you did an amazing job of bringing that to light in terms that everyone can understand, because I cannot tell you how often I'll ask someone about, well, do you know what Agenda 2030 is and how that relates to you personally? And they're like, no, what's Agenda 2030? And it's just like, oh my goodness. But the way you wrote that article, anyone can read that and say, wow, that makes sense. I get it. And so thank you for doing that.
You're welcome. Yeah, that was really my goal. And I enjoy doing that. And it's the article's called "The War on Beef: How Incrementalism Kills Freedom and Liberty." And I speak all over Texas and my presentation is called "The War on Beef." And really, the war on beef is basically a war on the charters of freedom of the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and we have to understand all those things, because we know that the last three generations have not been taught all of that stuff, and so we have to
That's
really
right.
focus on teaching the American people where their liberty comes from. And one of those things is hot on my mind right now, and is now everybody talks about a democracy. You see people at the highest levels of government talking about democracy. We are not a democracy. We are a constitutional republic. It's all about individual freedom. They believe that if we vote in a democratic way, they get what they want, but it's mob rule. But under the republic, it's about the individual. And as individuals prosper, they come together and they become more philanthropic, if that's the right word,
That's right.
And so that's where you have to we really have to help people understand and educate that these are individual freedoms. Liberty is all about the individual.
That's right. And I want to add one thing. Some people have the misconception that our freedom comes from the government. That couldn't be farther from the truth. Our freedom comes from Almighty God.
That's right. And Mary, I'm glad you said that, because this morning I was just having this talk with another individual, and that is why the attack on the charters of freedom is antichrist driven. You see, the global cabal is not of God. The World Economic Forum, the Agenda 21, 2030, that is not from God. Those are spiritual battles that we're battling, because these people know, God's enemies know Scripture, and they know that our freedom comes from God and God alone. And that's why they hate the United States. That's why they hate Americans, because they think the government gave us that freedom. The government did not. It was divinely inspired by God through our founders to give us liberty and freedom. And so that's why they absolutely hate freedom, because it's God ordained, and it comes from the very foundation of God, and they hate everything God. And so we learned a lot during that period, didn't we, Mary?
We did. The whole "we will not comply" thing, it just became a mantra.
Yes.
And I'm just going to say that I'm right there with you. Our church, we shut down for I'd say 2 or 3 Sundays just to kind of think through everything. And we want, it's like we're not operating in a spirit of fear, but we are going to operate in a spirit of wisdom. What is the wise thing to do? What would God have us to do? And then after 3 weeks of that, we said, no, we're done. We're going to sanitize every inch of this church, and we are open for business. And I cannot tell you how many new members. Yes, right? That's right. And we didn't.
How do we spread the gospel if we're not getting fed, right? If we're not getting fed in our own community, how do we spread the gospel? And the Lord tells us to go spread the gospel. See, this wasn't about COVID. It was about control.
I cannot tell you how many new members that our church received from other congregations who had shut down and complied. And we're like, no, we are not going down that path. We are open for business as usual.
Yes.
And it's been an amazing journey of growth for our church, and I'm thankful for that. I'd like to do a deep dive into the whole, just what all is involved in the natural asset companies.
It's all about seizing control of the land, and they're coming through it in nefarious ways. Like the reason I believe that Texans are behind the ball on this is because 98% of Texas is privately owned. Well, that's not the way it is in the West. Colorado, Wyoming, Nevada, Utah, they're mostly owned by the federal government, right? And so we have had to fight property rights issues for years and years. My whole life, I've grown up with a property rights issue in the back of my ear, and that's one reason that I got into the fight when I grew up and became an adult. But now that I've warned for many years that these property right fights are coming from the north to the south. And so, in other words, you have conservation easements. That's the next big step in Texas. And I advise against conservation easements. What a conservation easement does is one entity uh, uh, creates a market tax for tax purposes, and they will pay a farmer or rancher so much per acre to put their ranch into a conservation easement that will be in the easement in perpetuity. That means forever and ever. Whoever owns the land has to abide by the easement rules, and then that organization that provided that gets a tax incentive. See, and so what you're doing ultimately is taking the power away from the landowner, number one, and then you're dictating from the grave, number two, what anybody can do with that land. But ultimately, if you don't abide by the rules, seizure is possible. That is not out of the question. And so, for example, in Colorado, 20 years ago, they came in and offered all these ranchers conservation easements. Everybody was poor; they needed the money. Gave them a big bunch of money. They put these land in easements in perpetuity. And so now what does the next generation do? They have to abide by these rules that they didn't set on this land. And then in some cases, some of these easements were overvalued. And then the state government comes back in and says, you owe us this much money. Your easement was overvalued. Well, how do they pay the money when they don't have it? They give them the land. See, it's all about land seizure on the back end of absolutely everything. Because the global elite and the global cabal cannot control production and ultimately consumption without owning the means to production. What does it mean when somebody says collectivism is about gaining control of the means of production? Well, that's communism, right? That's all that is. It's communism. And so that's what they're after, is the means of production of natural resources, of the land. And who has that? Food producers. We have. That's right. We have to save that. And so that's ultimately what we're talking about today, and that's what we're doing. We have to save liberty through private property. That's what it comes to.
Well, their ultimate goal, their end game is ownership, is control, and they're just setting it up. They're setting
Correct.
a person up for failure when they do it the way that you're describing it, and it's unconstitutional.
Correct. And we see this interwoven into every fabric or in every facet of our lives. Let's take, for example, one issue in the beef industry right now is the radio frequency identification system. Okay, they want us to put RFID chips in our cattle. What does that do? Well, they're saying, hey, it gives us the ability to track disease outbreaks across the nation. Well, let's say it does. But what else does it do? It gives them the ability to know what you have on your property and how much of it you have. And then they can come in and say, Mr. Sullivan, you have 250 head of cattle on your property. Your carbon footprint is too high. And because we know how many you have to euthanize or get rid of 40% of your herd to maintain a carbon net of zero, right? That's what they're saying. But it doesn't stop there. They will use the RFID system as a taxation issue. They will tax you on production of red meat. They already want to tax us on that. I mean, that is an issue that NCBA brought up this year. They want to tax us, not NCBA, but there are people who want to tax us on the production of red meat and the consumption of red meat. And then what happens when they overtax us? We can't afford to hold the land. See, it all goes back to the land. You're overtaxed. You can't pay
Right.
the tax. They seize the land. This is all about gaining property for the global elite. And make no mistake about it, the United States leadership, a large part of it is and they're just puppets. They don't know. They think they have power. They have no power, but they're puppets in this huge land grab to take power away from the people. So it's very,
Well,
very easy.
I'm going to say it. I've said it in other podcasts. This is not going to be a surprise to anyone who follows me. But our government, the U.S. government, is complicit with the World Health Organization, the World Economic Forum, the UN, what I call the unholy alliance. They are complicit with all of that one world government strategy. That's why they have allowed and encouraged the open southern border, which has devastated this country.
Well, that
I don't
takes
even
us
have
back.
words for all of
Well, that takes us back, Mary, to that spiritual battle of good and evil,
that.
right?
Yes.
Because they do not want. They know they hate freedom. They hate freedom. Even the people
Mhm.
in our own government hate freedom. They love their power, but they hate individual freedom, and that's why they're doing this. But we can thank George H.W. Bush for signing us on to the 2021 Agenda
Mhm.
2021 back in 1992. He did it. He's a Republican, but he's the one that did this. This isn't a Democrat Republican issue. This is a right and wrong issue. This is a
Right.
liberty versus communism issue, because you'll see that we have a lot of Republicans that aren't really conservative, right? You have to.
That's
It's
right.
not. It's That's why we have to be dedicated to the Constitution. And I always say that it's all about being a constitutional conservative, because that's how we founded this
Hmm.
nation. And that's if we're gonna
Exactly.
if our kids are going to enjoy, and that's why I'm here is for my son. If they're going to enjoy liberty and freedom, we have to fight for the Constitution.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
It is heartbreaking to me to see our Constitution trampled. It is just so wrong on so many levels, and so few people seem to be concerned about it.
Well, and yesterday or this week we see all of these protesters, and they are degrading
Mhm.
our murals. They're degrading our statues of history. They are burning our flag. And the first thing, and I see this beautiful flag behind you, and the first thing I think about when I see that flag is that color red. And I think about all of the men and women who went and died without asking questions of why. They went and they
Mhm.
shed their blood on other soil, on foreign soil, and our own soil, so that we can
Mhm.
enjoy a free life, so that we can enjoy prosperity, so that we can enjoy individual liberty. And then we have these kids that have never suffered a day in their life. They've never gone hungry. They've had everything they've ever wanted given to them. They've been taught wrong in these schools, taught wrong in the universities. They don't have a clue of what suffering is, like these people that have given their blood, these families that have given their blood over in the name of freedom. That is suffering. And if more people had to suffer, this nation would be a different nation.
One of the comments that you will see me make frequently on social media is simply this: I strongly believe that you need to support the country you live in, and you need to live in the country you support. If that happened, I think a lot
I
of what
love
we've been
that.
seeing this week would stop.
I love
Well,
that.
it's a
I
fabric.
absolutely love
Well,
it.
please use it.
I
It's
will.
uh, truth be known, I didn't. I can't take credit for that. I read it somewhere, couldn't tell you where, but I'm like, that really makes sense. So, to
It
whoever
does.
really wrote that, I thank you and give you credit.
And
It
I'm
wasn't
not,
me, but it works well.
yeah, and I'm not saying we don't have the right to protest. I'm saying we do. We have these rights under the Constitution to do these things. But we have
Mhm.
crossed a line into diabolical, into evil. And,
Mhm.
I realize everybody has a different opinion, but we are walking on a line that is very dangerous. When
Mhm.
we go against God's principles as a nation,
Mhm.
we will suffer for that. He will punish us for
We
that.
will.
And that's
Mhm.
why we have to really spread the gospel too, at the same time that we're presenting the liberty and freedom to people, because it is all about the gospel, the truth. It's the truth. Gospel is the truth, right?
Amen to
Yeah.
that.
Ooh,
That is absolutely right.
wow.
That's another thing. You look at when, when the decline really started in this country, and it has a phenomenal tie to when they took God out of schools.
Absolutely.
You and I both are
Absolutely.
old enough to remember. Yeah, you remember when our school day started, it was with the Pledge of Allegiance, and we
Yep.
sang a patriotic song.
Yep.
And I don't know when it stopped, but I don't think they do that much anymore.
No, I don't even know if they do it at all, honestly. But we did it every day. We said the Pledge of
Mhm.
Allegiance. My mom told me, she said, I remember when she was a kid. My mom is 76 years old now. And she said, we had scripture in school,
Mhm.
and it's just such a change of culture, right? This melting pot of
Mhm.
America has changed its culture, but we don't have to change the constitutionality of our nation. Gro Brundtland, the mother of sustainable development, a Norwegian who invented sustainable development. She was also the mother of ESG and DEI. And DEI has come in, and now if you say you're against DEI, it means you're racist. But you know what it is? DEI gives those without the ability to earn it something they haven't earned. And I don't know about
Have
you,
you
but I
been?
I want the best surgeon cutting on me. I want the best pilot
That's
flying me
right.
in the air. I don't want somebody running overseeing my life just because they are a black woman. I don't. I'm not against women. I have three sisters and a mother, and one sister runs a ranch for us, and they can do great things. But if they haven't earned it and don't have the experience of it, this is wrong. It's wrong, and it's dangerous.
I'm going to say another thing that you will often see if you follow me on any social media. One of the things I say, DEI stands for didn't earn it.
That's right. There you
Let
go.
that sink.
I like that. I like that.
Well, it's true. I have had to work for everything I've ever had,
Sure.
and I was not born with a silver spoon in my mouth. I've had to work hard. And then not long ago, I read something that some of the illegals coming over are receiving max Social Security. I've not validated that, but if that's true, I don't have to tell you how I feel about that because they haven't earned
Exactly.
it.
No,
I'm not
exactly.
getting, and yeah, I will tell you, I am not getting max Social Security, but I have not stopped working since the age of 19. I have been self-supporting since age 19, and I have paid my fair share of taxes, and I don't have to tell you how I feel about that if it is true.
Just
So,
another
okay, I'll calm down.
another way to destroy a nation. Transfer the wealth.
It is.
That's what communism is.
It
It's
it, it
transferring
is.
the wealth. Yep.
Right. Yep. This has been fun. I'm just going to say it. It has been fun, and I think it's been not only fun for us but for our listeners and enlightening.
Yeah, and I
So,
don't think we
one
even
of the
got into
things
the
that
deep dark pits yet.
no, we didn't. I don't think we did at all. Um,
uh,
I had wanted to ask about kind of a follow up to your convention where Alex Newman spoke. What kind of response did you get after that? I'm sure, I mean, he's an amazing, just an amazing resource. So
yeah.
you were very blessed with him.
Well, Alex and I became very good friends in 2020 after I did that wild video that went viral, and he had me on his show and his podcast, and Alex is a Christian, number one. He's a follower of
Mm-hmm.
Christ, and he's God has ordained him to be a very common man with an uncommon message, and he gave him maybe the highest intelligence of anybody I've ever spoke to in my life. And I've spoke to a lot of phenomenal, very high up people. But Alex Newman is special. and
Yes.
chokes me. It chokes me up just talking about him. And we have become friends. And so he was very, very well received at the RCAF convention, and he spoke truth, right, as he does. And he is able, in a deeper way than I am, to connect the dots of how all of this is interwoven in this diabolical web, and he understands it,
Mhm.
and he understands the origination of it. He understands the history of it. He has studied it for that's what he does for a living, right? He studies all this. He
Mhm.
writes books. I mean, he's a phenomenal person. And if I could just be with him for a day, he would get so tired of me. But we each have our place, right? And the Lord has given me
Right.
a voice for a few things for some one reason or another, and it gives him a voice and you a voice. So we all have to accept what the Lord has given us. But Alex Newman, by far for me, is the greatest American that walks in this country. He loves America and he loves freedom and liberty. He understands the Constitution. He has a total understanding of the foundation clear to the present. And he understands how it's all interwoven. So I respect him greatly for that. And we text very, very often, and I'm just so thankful for him. And if
Yes.
anybody doesn't know Alex Newman, I would try to get to know him and his writings and his work. He's a phenomenal individual.
I have an equal amount of admiration and respect for him. He's incredible.
Yes,
So
he is. And what's on top of that is he's so humble, right? He's just a
he
humble human
is.
being. Just shake
I
your hand,
know.
put your arm
I
around
know.
him. I just love him.
Yep, he's a great role model for many people.
Yes, he is.
What can we do, we as Americans, do to help you and support your endeavors? Because you are doing incredible work that it benefits us all. So
Well,
I'd
I,
like you to
I
speak to that
appreciate
as
you
well.
saying that, Mary. Thank you so much. I want you to know, and I want Americans to know that this journey that I'm on, it, it, it was thrown in my lap. I did not seek this. I have not sought to get a claim that I don't deserve. This was thrown
Mhm.
in my lap. I became passionate when my family lost some land to that land grab in 1999. I became passionate about our rights as citizens, and I've
Mhm.
never been political. I've never been the type of guy to get going on all this stuff. But something in 2010 with the Global Roundtable for Sustainable Beef, and then in 2015 we had a Black Swan event again in 19, and then the COVID deal just, I don't know, put a fire in me to help save this nation. And that's all I can do. I can only give my perspective as a cattle rancher. I speak in a lot of places. I have never taken one dime for speaking to any group or person. I never will. I don't think that um, I think God will take care of me otherwise. But it was funny. So when Glenn Beck called me, I was actually on a podcast with Representative Harriet Hagman. And I was right here in this room. And I looked down and there was an email on my phone from Glenn Beck. Well, automatically, I just thought it's spam because I had, well, let me even back up. A year ago, I have this very close friend that has some podcasts and stuff, and I called him and I said, "Hey, how can I meet Glenn Beck? I want to get him to come speak at our convention." And he laughed at me, and he says, "Shad, Glenn Beck has so many layers of security around him. I can't even get to him." And this is a friend of Glenn Beck's. And I'm like, "Okay, that's fair. I understand that. Not worried about it." I let it go. It was a year long. Never thought about Glenn Beck again. Listened to some of his stuff. Love him. I think he's coming a long way. I think he's a great man. Super patriot. Well, then um, the natural asset company, the natural asset company article came out, and I was on this podcast with Harriet Hagman. It was an RCAF podcast. And I looked down and there was this email from Glenn Beck. And I'm like, nah, that's That's spam. So I didn't think about it for like, I don't know, several hours to a day. And I got thinking about it. I'm like, well, maybe that was Glenn Beck. So I went back, and sure enough, it was Glenn Beck. And he said, "Hey, Shad, can you tell me about these laws that they passed in California, animal rights laws?" And I'm like, heck yeah, I can. I know exactly what all that's about, and I know who people I can call for resources. And so um, I answered him, and I said, I immediately said, "Well, how would you like me to answer him?" I said, "Do you want me to, just write a letter? Just write." He says, "Write me a letter." And what I did was I wrote that letter based off of my War on Beef presentation, basically a lot like that article that was in the Tri-State News.
Mm-hmm.
And he called me the next day and he said, "Can you be down here Wednesday?" And I'm like, "Oh my gosh, no, I can't." And but I said I can be down the next week. So he says, "Please come down the next week. I want to do a podcast with you." And so while I was there, I'm like, and oh Mary, I was so sick. I had this terrible sinus infection and I had a chest cold and I was bloated up and I felt terrible. But I knew this was the opportunity of a lifetime. And
Right.
but I never understood why I was there. And so me and my wife had prayed about it. And when I got down there, I just said, "Glenn, why am I here?" And he says, "Because of your natural asset company article, your NACS article." And I'm like, "You're kidding me." Because, Mary, I thought it was from that video that went viral in 2020. And so right
Mm-hmm.
then I knew he had never seen that video. And right then I knew that God had another plan for me. And we prayed in the parking lot in my pickup that day. And I said, "Lord, I don't know what you want from me. I know that you have given me the gift of writing and speaking and relationships. Let your will be done and let me do it humbly. If there is a door you want to open and you want me to walk through, you're going to have to push me through it because I'm not smart enough to know what you're doing here." And that's where I've left it. And so I think that we depend on the Lord to guide us. We're humble about it. I don't think that with all of the blood shed for this country, for our liberty, why would I ever go out and charge somebody to speak, to teach them these things that they need to inherently know? I don't feel right about it. Um,
Mm-hmm.
my banker's always like, "Well, since the Glenn Beck deal, have you capitalized off of that?" And I'm like, "No, I haven't. I'm a cattle rancher. I make my living in the cattle." And so that's kind of where I stand on all of it. And I'm sorry I went down that rabbit hole, but I want people to
That's good.
understand that this is at my heart. This is at my heart because I want the next generation to taste and feel that feeling of freedom and liberty. They deserve it. They deserve it.
There's a genuineness that absolutely exudes from every fiber of your being. And that right there is why. You just said it.
Thank you. So when I tell people what are the call to actions, how do we save this nation? How do we save our communities? How do we save our families? The first thing, the most unpopular thing is we have to return to God. We have to return to his word and his scripture. And we have to abide and obey by his rules. And we have to honor him. And we have to spread his message of love. And love isn't the love that they've portrayed out across the world now. Love is salvation. And so we have to return to God. We have to uphold the very document that created this nation, and that is the Constitution of the United States. We have to learn it, we have to read it, and we have to respect it, and we have to follow the rules on it. That's the greatest document in the history of the world besides the Bible. It's phenomenal. We have to do that. We have to get involved on the local level. Even I know some of our retired people, they're tired, they've worked hard. Our younger people, they're
Mhm.
interested in different things. It doesn't matter the age. If you believe in saving a nation, we have to get involved locally. That means on our city councils, our county commissions, our school boards are so important right now because our schools are being infiltrated by the enemy and they are not teaching reading, writing, and arithmetic. Instead, they're teaching all this other nefarious stuff. We have to get involved in our churches and we have to uphold God's word in our churches and spread the gospel that way. We have to support and promote good policy on the local, state, and national level. One of the things that I work hard for is mandatory country of origin labeling. I think that is so important. We don't,
Yes.
as beef producers, nobody knows if they're buying American beef. We need that mandatory country of origin label. It's on every single product we buy in the United States except beef and pork. And that should be number one. We have to re-implement mandatory country of origin labeling. We're going to try to do that in the Farm Bill this year. We have to buy and support local. Even though it is more expensive, we have to get farm to table. It's been a great movement since 2020. It has been. It's been great, but it's expensive, and we have to be willing to sacrifice those dollars to keep our local community. If we don't have our local communities intact, this state cannot be intact, and these nations cannot be intact, and then it's a free for all. That's what it is. So those are some of the steps that I think that we should always take. We buy local. We support our local communities as much as we can monetarily. We support, like there's been a really great movement in South Dakota where the schools are taking in local beef to feed their kids. Well, that is moving across, and I see several schools in Texas starting to do it. My little hometown in Colorado, we still ranch in Colorado, so we're very involved in our community there. We're providing, our ranch is helping provide beef starting next year for that school. And so we're really excited about these awesome things. There's a movement of regenerative ranching. Not every movement is for everybody, but that's a great movement. This climate change hoax that has created all of this stuff. They had to create a crisis. They had to create a crisis to gain control, and with that crisis, to make people feel good about it, they had to create sustainable development, which would fix the climate crisis. But overall, the climate crisis is about control. That's what it is. And so there's all of these movements coming out of these things of nonsense that are good, and the regenerative agriculture one is part of that. It's all about how the liberty to produce what we see fit and how we see fit. That's what it's about. It's the ability for the consumer to choose what they want. If they want to go and buy foreign beef, let's make sure that foreign beef is labeled. But I guarantee the Americans are going to buy American beef, right? And that's not what our foreign adversaries want. So that's why we don't have mandatory country of origin labeling. It's the enemy has infiltrated and said, "Hey, that's not fair." And who cares if it's not fair? It's our sovereign nation. We need to be able to uphold our sovereignty. So I know I get off on these rabbit trails, but that's a lot. It's all interwoven, and we need to understand that. So those are the things we need to do. Get involved. Honor Jesus. Honor the Constitution. Buy local. Farm to table. Grow your own food. Hold your representatives, all representatives, local, state, national representatives, hold them accountable. They're working for us. We're not working for them. I want to remind your viewers, if you think you can't have an effect on your community, or, I hear a lot of people say, "I've never voted. I'm never going to vote. My vote doesn't count." Well, it dang sure doesn't count if you don't go vote. Right. So maybe there is nefarious stuff going on, which we know there is, but you got to make your presence known. And so when this come up today, when you think you don't matter, you do. And so I want to read this to you. It says, "Remember, this is a good friend of mine in Nebraska or in Kansas that just sent me this out of the blue right before this show. And she says, Remember, less than 3% of a nation fought to be independent from Britain. Less than 8% gave up their finances, land, or goods in an effort to help patriots fight for independence. And less than 12% total actually supported the idea of independence. You don't have to be popular to change the course of a nation. You just have to be involved. And so that's what we need to do. Even if it's just a little bit, we need to help save this nation.
Amen. And boy, what a powerful close. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you, Mary. It's been a great pleasure, and I like to tell people, always remember this: where there is beef, there is freedom.